Today's guests are a married couple, Mark and Mihaela. From Money for Meaning, we're going to talk about financial independence and mindsets around money. Welcome to Richer Soul, Life Beyond Money, the last baby step. Imagine it's 12 months from now, and you've achieved your major life goals. How does it feel to be in the best shape of your life? To wake up energized, excited about the day? What's it like to have great relationships and friends who support you and propel you forward? How does it feel to have an excess of money to be able to make the choices you want? To be fearless and open to trying new adventures? Imagine being connected to the universe and having it provide everything you desire. It's possible over time, and your past does not dictate your future. The only thing holding you back from this vision is you. It's time to take control of our thoughts and use them to our advantage. I help people live the life of their dreams and bring balance to health, wealth, relationships, time, and spirituality. You can see how on richersoul.com by looking under the coaching call tab to hear actual coaching sessions. If you haven't had a chance to listen to episodes 1 through 9, I encourage you to go back and listen to the framework behind Richer Soul and how to create the life of your dreams. It's simpler than you can imagine. You can also find all the show notes for this episode. I've started to send out a monthly email, and you can sign up while you're there. In the short monthly email, I will share the best articles of the month, let you know about upcoming episodes, and also share a little bit of wisdom I learned this month. If you signed up already, you should have received an email on March 1st. If you didn't, you may want to check your spam or promotions folder. I also share the most interesting articles I read every week on Facebook at facebook.com/Richer Soul. It's harder to keep wealth than it is to make it. Once you come up with a system to create wealth, you need to come up with a system to keep it. If you'd like a second opinion on your financial plans or are worried about missing out on something, check out the SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats at richersoul.com/SWOT. Today, we have a couple who's achieved financial success at an early age. Mark and Mihaela help guide people down the road towards financial freedom decades before traditional retirement age by helping them to make the space to discover their own unique callings in life. This leads to eliminating peripheral waste and building a financial springboard so we can take risks, start businesses, pursue our passions, and clear the path to true meaning and purpose in life. Let's hear their story. Welcome to Richer Soul, Mark and Mihaela. It's great to have you join us today.
Great to be here, Rocky.
Great to be here.
Let's start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
I can take this one first. My upbringing was pretty atypical, so I'll start out with a little bit of background. I grew up in the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, a communist country that doesn't exist anymore. So it was formed after the Second World War, bringing Serbs, Croats, Muslims in the region together. Then it fell apart in the early 1990s, descended into massive civil war, and broke apart into a bunch of smaller countries. My city where I grew up was Sarajevo, Bosnia. So you've probably heard of Sarajevo. Most people have from the images on TV from the war that went on. But all in all, I had a pretty normal childhood with a little twist here and there, like worshiping a communist dictator. as all the kids did because we didn't know any better. Marshall Tito. And I remember playing games as a kid like hopscotch. And if you stepped on a line, it meant you didn't love Tito. And that was bad. So it's pretty interesting. So on one side of the family, people had fully bought into that communist ideal of, brotherhood and everybody's equal, right? And then on the other side of the family, it was quite the opposite. They hated communism. But this is from my dad's side of the family. So my great-grandfather was killed by the communists after the Second World War. My grandma lost her dad when she was 10 years old, and she was in a family of 7. And all there, they had owned some land and so on, and everything was taken away from them and sort of pieced out and given to people to farm, they were considered bourgeois or whatever because they were landowning. It all basically became dilapidated and went to waste and so on. So that's on the dad side of the family. So even during communism, my dad was always an entrepreneur. He was always importing, exporting things from children's toys and so on. That was sort of the context which I grew up. In the background, I knew that tensions were starting to build. There were increased divisions along ethnic lines, the Serbs and Croats and Muslims. And even though I was 9, 10 years old, I was deeply aware of that. The word war would be, mentioned sometimes in the radio, and I heard that. But I can tell you that my family and no one we knew actually believed that a war would be possible. Because it would mean in a civil war, it would mean friends and neighbors killing each other. And it was completely inconceivable. One day when I was 10 years old, we woke up and heard the sound of gunfire and turned on the radio and heard that much of Sarajevo had been barricaded. So we grabbed some things, threw them in a car and we left. But I will never forget what my mom said as we were leaving. She said, we get some more things, get your homework. We could be gone for 2 weeks. But I could tell, I didn't take it seriously even then because I could tell from her body language and her tone that she thought, we would be back in a weekend and life would just keep going on as it always has and return to normal. Well, it's been 25 years now, and it's the last time that I saw my childhood home. I've never been back. So that set my life on a different course. We no longer had any possessions to speak of and became refugees. We were very fortunate that we had family in a safer part of the country who generously offered us shelter in their small apartment. We received packets from the Red Cross with some basic food supplies and so on that helped us out. And I changed 4 schools in just over a year during that period. It was pretty chaotic. And then 3 years later, my parents made the courageous move to immigrate to Canada without a dime to their name, without speaking. So none of us spoke English, and they had 2 children to support. Those first few years, definitely financial struggle. I remember that coin-operated laundry, like paying $1.75, just seemed so outrageous. So my mom would hand wash everything. And then the first time that my dad took us to McDonald's was just like this memorable family occasion. I still remember like the tiny little French fries and the, cardboard packets and that the food came in and so on. And I thought like, wow, this is so amazing. But through all this, I never saw myself as poor. The words, I am poor, never went through my head. I viewed it as temporary. I viewed it as successes, actually, because we overcame challenges to be there. I felt so grateful to be in Canada, to be with my family on this big adventure and have opportunities that I never even dreamed of. At the time, I was 13 years old. I wanted to be an astronaut, right? And I have no interest to do so anymore. But at the time, I thought, wow, this is actually possible for me. From that, I learned that possessions, money and possessions don't make me happy and are even fleeting. One day, we had all this stuff that everybody else has, the apartment and filled with things and so on. And then the next day that we had nothing. So what it's really taught me is to focus on experiences instead of possessions. Those memories, those experiences that really enriched us as people is the only thing that we really took with us. So the way I've lived my life is to focus on, I've never cared about accumulating a bunch of material possessions and things. If I spent money on something, it would be for experiences. For example, I was a saber fencer, won the gold medal at the Ontario Fencing Championships. And when I moved to the United States to get my PhD, the bronze medal at the Canadian National Championships. But during this time, in college, during my doctorate, my place didn't even have a bed. I slept on blankets and a sleeping bag on the floor. Ben had absolutely nothing and just plowed every dime into fencing camps and lessons and competitions and so on. So those have really been my takeaways. The key takeaway is to focus on, experiences and passions over possessions.
That's a remarkable childhood that you went through. And, as I think back, I think now after listening to your story, it kind of clicks to why my dad was that way as well, because he went through a similar experience when he was probably late teens, early 20s, where they had to leave everything behind and they would lose their possessions and start over again. And I think it's from that you realize you don't need all this stuff to be happy. You can just be happy in the moment. And I think that's a lesson that, unfortunately, in today's society is probably lost.
I completely agree. Yeah, those experiences of being in the moment. And it doesn't have to be a big moment. Even something simple. The other day, I felt in, a little bit of a funk. And then I went outside with my 4-year-old in the snow. And we had a snowball fight. And we just laughed from the heart. I felt so refreshed and I felt so joyful. Going to a store and running up my credit card and buying something, there's no way it could have been compared to just that experience of being with my kid.
I totally agree with you. So, Mark, you also have a story of money and growing up?
Yeah. It's a little bit different than Mihaela's story. I grew up in, Columbus, Ohio, and it was a lower middle class neighborhood. My dad was a postal worker. My mom was an Avon lady. I remember being a kid and growing up and always thinking, Dad's weird. Why? My parents are so weird. And it wasn't until later in life I could really appreciate why my dad was doing what he was doing, to have that deeper understanding once I had more responsibility in kind of the later teen years. Before I go into the real teachable moment, so Dad was super frugal. We always had beaters. We never had a new car ever, and I'd always give him hell about it and just kind of rib him when I was young. And then going back, one thing that helped me start really understanding why Dad operated the way he did was I was a Cub Scout. So it's probably about 7 or 8 years old, and it was around this time of year in the Christmas season. We were delivering turkeys to needy families. I remember walking up to the apartment, and the man of the house opened the door, and here I am holding a turkey. And I remember looking in the apartment, and I saw that they had this is probably late 80s, so it was a big projection screen TV. And I saw they were watching HBO, and it's man, we barely have cable, and our TV is not even maybe a third the size of that monster. They were smoking cigarettes, and I saw the wife walk in, and I saw her car, and it's a newer car than any car that we had. And I'm this doesn't make sense. I'm 7, 8 years old. How do they have more than us, and they're getting turkeys? We deliver the turkey, and then we'd go to the car. I remember turning to my dad and saying, Dad, are we poor? he looked at me and goes, "What do you think?" You know, I'm 7, 8 years old. I was thinking about it, and I was like, well, I guess no, because we don't have Cub Scouts delivering turkeys to our house. And I said, well, how did this happen? He goes, and he remember telling me, he goes, well, they're spending money on things they wanted, not necessarily things they needed. And that was a very early simplistic lesson, but it did carry over into my life. Just kind of like, wow, because we never had to worry about food. Money in the house was never a painful conversation. There was never fights over money. I never felt that we were poor. I remember asking Dad later, like, Dad, why don't you ever get a new car? I was probably about 13 or 12, something like that. Then he goes, let me ask you, would you like me to drive a new car, or would you like me to pay for your college? And I said, pay for the college. I never asked him about a new car again. But that was the kind of environment. I mean, Dad always kind of knew a guy. He was real social. And he had someone to give him friend pricing on everything, whether it was, you know, a car repair that he couldn't do himself. He'd always get a hookup from some guy in the neighborhood who knew his stuff. And I kind of took some of those lessons with me and just kind of tried to build on that. Like when I was growing up, I've got an allowance of $5 a week and for doing chores. And I wanted more than that. You know, I wanted to buy other stuff, and I was basically blowing that money at the arcade, you know, as a little kid. And I would always try to find a way to make money. I remember I'd get money for my birthday or something from a relative, and I'd buy a box of baseball cards, and I'd try to sell those packs of baseball cards to the neighborhood kids and to make some extra money. Or I'd go door to door selling seeds in the spring. I'd do whatever I could to try to hustle. It turns out I hung out so much at that arcade that they actually offered me a job mopping the floor on Saturdays, which is when I was there spending money, and they'd pay me $2.50 an hour, which I was like thrilled about. It's like $2.50 an hour. And I get to work 4 hours, and you give me 60 tokens. So now I'm going from spending $5 a week at the arcade to get, you know, basically netting 15 a week because they're giving me free tokens too. So I just started socking money away. So this is, you know, this was the young Mark Lancia, how I kind of got to where I was. I was a natural saver, just been growing up in that kind of environment. I never really stopped working since I was 12. I always had some job. I always was doing something. And no matter what happens in life, I'll always continue to work. It just, you know, now it's more, what do I want to work on versus what somebody else wants me to work on. And then I know the second part of the question about what does school teach me about money. I could tell you school taught me, as far as formal education, very little. But I did teach me a lot about status. I remember one year, it's probably middle school, I was in class and I had these new shoes. They were like some generic tennis shoe. I think it was called Jox, Jox. I don't even know what it is, but I thought they were nice. And these other kids were ribbing me because they had Air Jordans, and they were wearing Guess jeans and had starter jackets. So this is, if you know your time period, you know what I'm talking about. I remember firing back at them and saying, $100 for Air Jordans, and this is a 12-year-old. I said, you're just paying for the label, man. I said, these are just as good, and they're like more than half as much. Now, of course, they did pause and think about it, but that conversation didn't go too well. But that was really definitely heavily influenced from my father, and he didn't so much talk to me about money, but I just watch him operate. He showed me more than he told me, and that was really powerful. And I really wanted, as a teenager, to rebel against my parents, but I understood math, and it's hard for me to argue that the numbers work. So I was like, oh, geez, I'm going to walk in Dad's shoes a little bit, aren't I? So that was my story growing up.
That's quite interesting. And it's interesting to see that you had the conviction at a young age to say, I'm not going to fall for that label. I'm not going to pay for the Air Jordans because they aren't worth it. Most people still struggle with that as adults, I think, and having that conviction in themselves.
Yeah, no, I think so too. And it's I know my parents are providing the clothes, but I was like, I wouldn't even ask my parents to spend $100 out of principle. And I know that's probably very odd for a 12 or 13-year-old to think, but that was me. Like that's not worth it. Like that's like 2 or 3 video games. That would be way more fun than a pair of shoes. I don't care about shoes, that's because I was not a basketball player, so I didn't really need basketball shoes. Not that you need Air Jordans to play basketball. That's another argument, but.
Well, I think it's more of what you said about status. It's about, does your status come from the things you have, or does your status come from internal conviction that you are who you are?
Yeah, no, that's a powerful insight. It's true. And knowing oneself, which is that journey never really stops. But I had my person was, I felt I was I kind of knew my character of who I was around the time I graduated high school, which I think is maybe uncommon, but I kind of at least knew the kind of direction I wanted to go, and maybe formed a little bit earlier than others. Because I think when we don't know maybe who we are, which is completely all right. I mean, our interests change, we change throughout life. It's real easy for status and advertising to kind of take us down that consumer, mainstream, and maybe take us to a place that we really don't want to be at per se. And we may end up at, by default, of not having that kind of conviction that you mentioned, Rocky, of knowing who we are and what we stand for, what we don't, and where we want to be in life.
Yeah, those status symbols from Air Jordans and so on, they just become heavy-duty trucks or Louis Vuitton handbags or, just countless or brand new luxury cars or, so it doesn't change. That pattern continues.
Mm-hmm. It does. And I don't have a problem with the luxury items as long as you can pay for them and it doesn't change your lifestyle. In other words, you've built up the wealth to say, yeah, I want something nice. It's okay to buy something nice, but do it with intention.
Intention, exactly, that it's something you truly value. Mm-hmm. Once you're clear about what your values are, what your goals are, and making sure that it's not going to take you away from where you want to be, then that's fine. Mm-hmm. And since we're on the childhood, actually I remember Mark telling me a story about his dad. So, he mentioned that his dad is a frugal guy and so on. But there was a story when Mark's brother made it into a math camp at Harvard, actually, which was amazing for, this poor, public middle school that hardly anyone went to college. So I'll let you, Mark.
Sure. I forgot about that. But so my brother he was really good in math, and he got invited to this summer camp at Harvard, but it was expensive, probably the equivalent of maybe $10,000 in today's money. And he wanted to go, but he didn't want to ask Dad because, well, we all knew how frugal Dad was. So he eventually did. I think he was probably a sophomore, junior in high school when this happened. And he asked Dad, and he goes, Dad, it's a lot of money, but, they offered this to me. He looked at him and said, you're going to that camp. I'm paying for it. End of story. And it turns out, because Dad really valued education. In fact, me and my brothers and sisters were the first generation to get college degrees. So he went to that camp, and because of that, my brother ended up getting a full ride to college scholarship. And that was one of the big things that kicked him over the edge, is like, wow, he attended this. He went there. They made it happen. And so it was that kind of that early investing, because Dad always did value education. And like you said, it's about knowing what your values are. And I totally agree, Rocky. I think it's okay to get a luxury item. It's okay to do these things. We just don't want to live a miserly life at all. It's just understanding that it's not going to take us away from what we want to do in life, or maybe at least add to it, or just be, indifferent as far as. But so many purchases that many people make end up constricting us later in life through the obligations of debt, that we can't maybe change our job or change careers or step away and kind of do some inner exploring about what the next thing we want to do in life is, because our younger self signed us up for all this debt that our older selves basically inheriting. So the way I kind of look at it is just framing it to take care. We want to treat that older version of ourselves better every time, and set them up. So, I think that's how cynicism can build is, I probably wouldn't be very happy if I knew I wanted to do something else, but I couldn't because I've got hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt that I'm already obliged to take care of, as opposed to every year can be more exciting than the next with new possibilities because laying the foundation of flexibility where to create and co-create the life we want to live with meaning and purpose.
So what are your plans to teach your kids about money and transfer these mindsets to them?
So to me, I think minimizing screen time is key. So the exposure to screen time also comes with exposure to all these ads. The children in particular, they don't have that critical thinking to say, no, this is really, this is really not something that's going to add to my life or that I really should be buying. So our TV is never on, especially when kids are awake. If it's on, it's playing some music on Pandora. So as a result, our 4-year-old really doesn't ask us for anything. I go to stores, we'll even walk through toy aisles, and she really it doesn't even occur to her. She doesn't want these things. She wants time with mommy and daddy. She wants to go outside and play. And, the only thing she wanted was a dress and a doll for Christmas. And she got that and she was thrilled. She was like, this is the best Christmas ever. Yeah, out of all the Christmases she's had, and she remembers this is the best one ever. But yeah. And then the second thing I'd like to teach, and we're already starting to lay the foundation for this, is to view money as time. And not be wasteful and really have that recognition that somebody has to go to work and earn this money. So we shouldn't be throwing it away. There is a price for everything. And then the third thing from my end is I'd really like to encourage entrepreneurial ideas. In fact, I don't know what size, but I'd love to have, some kind of a fund to let kids try out ideas and learn about basics like accounting and sales and marketing and inventory and all these sort of things, and let them fail, and learn resilience, learn how to take those experiences, learn from them, and grow from them. So I think that this is so key, and it's something that's gotten me stuck in life in the past, is that sort of fear of failure. So I'd really like to teach that resilience.
That's excellent choices. I know we did a couple of those things. When my kids were little and the commercial would come on TV for a toy, we'd watch the toy commercial and I'd be like, you have that toy. Is it that much fun? And they're like, no, because it's made up totally. I'm like, the whole purpose of this commercial is to take your money. That's what they want. They want your money. Learn to say no to them. And I do remember when my daughter was, I think, probably around 13, she tried her hand at a business which was making bracelets. She learned it's very hard to compete on Etsy. She learned to sell to people she met. And at one point I said, you can make twice as much money if you just double your price. People will still buy it. And so she did. And so she found out about pricing power. She learned how to figure out postage and buy shipping boxes and do all of those things. And at the end, I think she learned how hard it is to do this. And she decided she didn't want to pursue it anymore. And I was okay with the failure. I'm like, you learn so many skills from just going through the process of doing that. And we've had a couple others with her with that as well, which reminds me, I'm probably going to have to work on my son a little bit more to do that. He did it when he was younger, but as he's gotten older, he's been too busy with other stuff, I guess.
Right. Yeah, that joy of learning is so key, and not fearing, saying yes and trying new things in life. I've really come to believe that if we can move beyond our comfort zone and overcome those fears and be okay with failing, it doesn't matter. I mean, we've got one life to live. The biggest failure is not trying things and, exploring and growing and being who we are. Yeah, so that's what I'd like to pass on.
What do you see are some of the biggest fears that people face?
I think fear of failure is definitely up there on the list that keeps people stuck where they are. And I personally went through this, during my I've got a PhD in biomedical engineering. And around the midpoint of the PhD, I mean, it was very apparent that something was wrong. This was not the path for me. It was, the first couple of years, it was a lot of classes as well and other things and so on. So it wasn't too bad. But once I really started to focus on the research, I mean, I became more and more depressed, honestly. I mean, it was hard to just get up in the morning. And I remember walking, I was putting in, 70 plus hour weeks, Monday through Sunday, especially towards the end. And I remember walking home from the research lab one day and just clutching onto a leaf, just to feel something alive, because I felt like I wasn't living. I mean, I envied people who were in prison because I thought, gosh, they're in prison, but they get fed and at least their minds are free. That was just how it might have been fine for somebody else, but this is what my experience was like. And yet I kept grinding through for 2 more years to finish this thing. And in retrospect, I thought back to this experience and, why did I keep doing that? And the answer was so clear. It was fear. I felt that if I quit and stepped away, then that meant that I failed. And if I failed at this one thing, then I was going to be a failure for life. And then, images swirl in your mind. I pictured future job interviews. I'd go in and, they'd look at, my resume, have a conversation with me and think, she left her PhD midway through. I mean, is this, she's a quitter. I mean, is this the kind of person we want in our team? So I thought that I would just carry that failure label on my forehead for life, basically. So I kept going and, and grinding through. And as a result, I traded a part of my 20s, which should have been some of the most exciting and amazing years of my life and personal growth. And I traded it to be called Dr. Jekic. And honestly, I thought it was a bad bargain. So we all, struggle at times and we all make mistakes and go off our path. But when we let fear be in the driver's seat, we rarely end up where we want to be.
So what happened after you finished the PhD?
After I finished, so I took some time off. I was very fortunate that even on my graduate student stipend, I was saving money at the time. So I had some breathing room and runway and I had no debt. So I took 6 or 9 months to just be, to explore, who I am and what I actually wanted to do. And I did things like, I ran half marathons. I took a painting class and learned how to paint, which was pretty interesting for an engineering PhD. I learned about economics and finance and all these things about psychology and so on. So I really feel like that period, I mean, without even realizing it, I would write every day about my thoughts, feelings, and experiences without knowing that some years down the road, I would write a book, Money for Meaning. Running my half marathon. I'd never run a race like that before, anywhere close to that distance. And I stood at the start line and took that leap of faith. Despite that anxiety, took that first step and ended up running the whole race without stopping in a good time. So it was a really wonderful period of personal growth. And then after that, I was sitting in a painting class one day, actually, and it just struck me that I'm ready to go back to a professional environment. I mean, I want to go back and do something. And I ended up taking a job that was actually completely out of the field of engineering or research. It was focused on entrepreneurship and venture capital investments. I worked with my state, and it was this large program focusing on public-private partnerships where, the state would give matching dollars to these venture capital funds that would invest in early stage companies in the state so that they would grow jobs here and bring in capital and so on. And I thought it was fantastic. I really, really enjoyed that. At the time, there was some politics with it. The administrations changed, and there were initially lots of layoffs and some attrition and so on. So with some people, the morale was low. But to me, I mean, I was just thriving because it was what I wanted to do. I was excited about it. This was my choice. So yeah, for the next 5 years, I really enjoyed doing that.
She did enjoy doing that. And I remember the morale was probably really low, but compared to what she went through for the PhD, I was like, you were in hell and now you're in purgatory, is what I said.
That's what Mark, at one point. So I came in at the tail end of one political administration without knowing anything about politics whatsoever. And then the next administration came in, and then like literally within a month, 3 of the 4 people who hired me were terminated just because they were, I guess, appointed by the other administration and so on. So at one point, we went down from a team of 18 down to 4. So I hear that's not typical. Now, on the other hand, for somebody who was still excited and enthused and still doing a great job, there was plenty of promotion opportunities that I took advantage of. So I'd been promoted a couple of times, and just built these wonderful connections. And then after I left, after that ran its course, and I was at the end of my growth curve, there was nothing more that I wanted to accomplish. I stepped out, and I still had those connections. I did some consulting work a little bit before my son was born. And I'd like to do that again. I actually purposely hit the pause button on my own because I wanted to spend more time with my kids.
That's awesome that you get the ability to do that. It sounds like, though, when you stopped growing is when you lost interest in continuing on. Is that what I understood correctly?
That's absolutely right. It came to a point that things reached steady state, and there was really nothing more. I mean, the things were going to run its course without really any changes, no innovation and creativity and so on that I could apply until there was a big change, like another change in administration and so on. So I really felt I was just stagnating at the time. And, I liked the people, I liked a lot of what I was doing, but I just felt like it was time to leave and move on. And I didn't want to make the same mistake again, with sticking to something sticking with something that had run its course. My heart, mind, spirit were all aligned. I felt like I was ready to move on, and I stepped out, and it truly felt liberating.
You had the ability to do that because you had the finances in order and the ability to say no and walk away.
That's absolutely right. That financial runway, knowing that, we could go for 10, 20 years if Mark and I both lost our jobs and never made another dime, that kind of financial buffer really helps focus the energy and attention on what we really want to do instead of how are we going to survive? How are we going to pay the bills next month? Mm-hmm. So that's been really helpful.
How were you able to build that amount of savings at a younger age?
For me, when I graduated with my bachelor's in engineering, I was very fortunate. I did not have any student loans, but it was in a recessionary period, and I couldn't find a job. Half of my class couldn't even get co-ops because they were just not to be had. This is around 2003 timeframe. So I eventually found a job about 4 months after I graduated, and it was not paying, well, I'll tell you, it was $17 an hour as an engineer. And but I took it because I needed experience. And I worked 60 to 70, sometimes 80 hours a week. And it was a very low morale factory I was working in. I mean, it was not a good place. I remember regretting, why did I get my degree in this? This is terrible. I'm going to go back to school and do something else, because this is what manufacturing is like. This is not for me. And I remember the first 2 months of work, the days I did have off, I'd go out with my friends. We'd go to restaurants, I'd go drinking. And I remember I didn't save anything for the first 2 months. And I was like, oh my gosh, like in the pit of my gut, it felt like almost depression. Like, this is feudalism. Like, I'm going through what it feels like hell, and I'm getting literally nothing to show for it at the end of the day, except for a weekend binge with my friends to try to escape this reality that I'm not enjoying where I'm working. It's not so much that the work was bad, it's just those long hours were just too much, and life is completely out of balance. So I started I was like, I got to start saving. So what I do is I take out $120 cash, and I put it in my wallet, and that was basically my visual management. I would put all gas for my car on my credit card, and that's the money I had for the week. So I'd maybe eat. I could have had more nutritious food in retrospect, but a lot of fast food. And then the weekends, I would actually go out and spend that money. And I knew if I had to go to ATM, I was just taking from myself. But that really helped me, and I was honestly able to still do everything I wanted to do. I just had to be more creative and just, hey, maybe I'm not going to get dessert tonight because I want to get a beer tomorrow or what have you. And that enabled me to start saving, even at that wage, about 50% of my income. And then after about a year and a half later, I was able to go to another company paying much better. And then I just kept that same kind of mindset. And also, I mean, I remember seeing the rents at the time were probably $600-700 for an apartment. And I was like, man, that's a lot of money. Like, I'm never home. I don't want all this stuff. Then I started talking to people, and I found out I could just rent a room for maybe $200 to $300 a month. And I was like, that's perfect, because all I really need is a bed to sleep at night. Like, I'm not going to spend any time there at all. I'm out doing stuff. I'm out being social. I'm out building relationships. So I was able to effectively, in one day's work, pay for a month's worth of rent, and which really helped me sock that money away. And that's what I did. And also buying used cars, and I always knew people, either myself or other people, to work on them. And I got very fortunate. They're always very reliable vehicles as well. So that was kind of the genesis of how I was able to save that critical mass. But I didn't sacrifice it. I never felt like I was going without or really tightening my belt. I was just focused on what I wanted to do, which was I wanted to have fun with friends. I'm in my 20s at this point. I have fun with friends. I wanted to travel. And if I did it really efficiently, this excess savings was the natural outcome. And that's really that springboard of how that grew, and how I was able to eventually pay cash for a house by 30 was just all that excess money that I didn't really need to live the lifestyle I wanted to live.
You said something interesting, because this is where I think people get stuck. You said, I have a choice of dessert today or beer tomorrow. And you also said when you go to the ATM, you're taking from yourself. You have an alternative to the choice of the moment, which is, I think, where most people get stuck. They walk into Costco, they see a beautiful flat screen TV in there, and it's like, I want that. But if there's no counterbalance to, I want that or I'll be depressed, it makes it hard to make that decision in the moment. Or if I want that, but I'd rather have freedom. And you need the counterbalance in that moment to say, what are the consequences of this decision? And I think that is where people get stuck. They don't have the counterbalance consequence of what they're giving up for that purchase in that moment.
Once it becomes ingrained, I would say that, and once we've asked enough times, why do we want the things we want? what are they going to do for us? Is it going to be neat for, 2-3 days and then just start collecting dust like a lot of other things we have? Or is it something that's truly going to lead to some lasting joy? So so once this becomes ingrained, I would say we no longer even want it. I mean, I can't remember the last time I went through a store and thought, gosh, I'd really like to have that, but man, it's going to move me away from freedom and I really shouldn't because I want something else. Like that's not even present. It's literally the desire is not there. Just this passionate desire for freedom, for living life on my terms, for making an impact, and for making the most of this precious life that I will never have again, right? That's really has been so integral, and that's what drives me.
Yeah, I don't think there's been much temptation. It's not like it's not like going to a store is a gauntlet of temptation. I'm just like, oh, I must try to have willpower. It's like, I don't even want it. It's not even worth the trade-off unless it's really something I can use or I actually need to help enrich our life or fix something. It's. I mean, I guess my mindset's very utility based. What's this going to do for me? Because if it's not, labels don't do much for me. I simply don't want it.
I think a lot of people struggle in this area. I mean, you people will say that all the time. I go to Costco, I can't get out for under $100. I go to Target, I can't get out for under $100. I'm like, yeah, you can. I don't know what you're putting in your cart. It's a struggle for people to change that mindset of not wanting to put the things in the cart. And the easiest way to do that is not walk in the store.
Oh, definitely. And I think about that. Like, I think another thing that helped at an early age, I was actually still in high school, and I knew I wanted to try to make music a career. And I was fortunate enough to meet a great group of guys. I was actually in an original band for 8 years, and we recorded 4 albums and did a lot of had an RV, did a lot of touring, and in that same time I was going to college. But at that moment, I knew that I was doing exactly what I was supposed to be doing at that time of my life, and there was nothing you could buy in this world to give you that feeling of being on point and on purpose. And anything else that really could be purchased for me was like a cheap substitute or a distraction from that. So I was very fortunate that I got a taste of what that feels like to be on point and on purpose at an early stage in life. And after the band, it ran its course, and that actually my passion ended up going away because it's just, our interests in life change. And it was time to walk away from that and do something else. And I found myself in kind of a spiritual desert and almost kind of a lack of meaning and purpose, because not my identity wasn't so much intertwined in the band, but it was a big chunk of my life. 20, 30 hours a week was doing that, where the other 40 was going to college. And I was like, now what? So I kind of went into this desert, and I knew that possessions were not the answer. I knew that spending money, going to debt would bring me no closer or make me no happier. So I just kind of really started to kind of turn inward and kind of pray and meditate on, what am I supposed to do next in my life? What's that next thing to try to get that feeling back of doing what I was meant to do at the time in life I was meant to do it. And I eventually rediscovered that, but it took me a little bit of time, and I made some mistakes on that journey of just, learning, listening to my heart, praying a lot, and trying out different things and moving in the right directions, and this listening and looking for those cues.
You both went through that period of time where you pulled back and you spent time thinking, and you used the words on point, on purpose. I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with. They don't know what they want. They go to college, they come out with whatever degree, they get an okay job, and they kind of fall on a track. And they didn't pick that track. They just kind of got put on it. And they never, if things are okay, you never take the time to stop and say, is this really the track I want to be on? Is this really the purpose I want? And I've had a lot of guests on who occasionally will say, I put my ladder on the wrong building, and I realized that, and I made the leap of fear change the ladder my building's on and get off that track. It sounds like you both have had success in doing that. What have you found with the people you talk to? How many of them spend the time and are on point on purpose?
Wow. I just wanted to say, Rocky, very insightful. You're exactly right. People do struggle with that. I've actually had some recent conversations with a couple of people who've read our book and just kind of going back and forth. It was really fun. I ended up doing a full disclosure, we both did, to each other. Here's what our finances look like. But more important, it wasn't about the money. It wasn't about a number or whose number is bigger. It's about what do we want to do with our life? Because everyone I've talked to who's kind of is in this kind of seeking stage, they've said to me, they said, Mark, I don't care about the money. Now, obviously, a lot of these people saved, some close to $1 million, some a little bit more than $1 million at a young age. But what they're really saying is, money doesn't make me happy. I know it's not going to make me happy. I'm looking for something else. But they're stuck in these antiquated behaviors of just, I'm going to the same job. And like you said, Rocky, it's not bad. It's not a bad place to work. But is that what we want for our lives? Is just okay? Is that good enough? Is just okay good enough? No, it's about making that space and breaking away from that fear, which is almost that gravity that's holding us where we're at, because it's what's familiar. Then we all tend to gravitate towards that comfort zone, what we know versus what we don't know. And that's kind of the journey I've been on, at least last month with a couple people I've been talking to a lot, and that's what we're working on, is trying to break that fear mindset and making that time to explore. Because a lot of times, if it's not possessions, they're just making themselves so busy, they don't have that space and that time to dive in deep and explore other options or get a flavor for this or that, or at least mentally go through and figure out at least what they don't want in life, and then start going through it that way. And that's the trap that I've seen a lot of people in, and that fortunately for these people, they recognize that, and they're just trying to figure out, I need that passion to make the leap, and I need to find out what that interest and what that passion is, so I can give the courage to move away from where I'm at and to go down a different path. And a lot of people, it's just that void of something, that next big thing, that passion.
What percentage of the people do you think are on point on purpose? What percent are looking? And what percent are just mindlessly going down whatever path?
Man, great question, Rocky.
Great question.
I could give you, honestly, I've talked to Mihaela before about just numbers. And I don't have any hard data, but I can give you just from my personal experience and my gut. For the on point and on being present, I'd say maybe 3% or less, to be honest with you.
I agree with that number.
That's what my gut tells me. And I think over 50% don't even know that they're in the weeds. They don't even know enough to know that they're in a trap. And then there's probably 20, 30%, or at least maybe passively meandering, or maybe there's another 10% that's kind of like, hey, you know what? I know I'm in this trap and I'm looking for a way to get out.
I probably agree a lot with your numbers. And that's just what I've seen. And what's surprising me most in life is that 3%. How few people just aren't being purposeful, aren't focusing on what they want and going after it. And I know it's a struggle, because there's a million people fighting against you, and it's hard to be the one who goes against them. And
absolutely.
There's no money in society to say, do what you want, not what we all want, so we can make money off of you.
Exactly. I was going to say as well, the combination of advertising and peer pressure. It's just, and looking around and seeing, it's like just accepting a normal, right? Well, this is what everyone's doing, get up in the morning, get dressed, fight the traffic, go to work, a job that's just okay, fight the traffic, come home, like do a bunch of chores and busyness and maybe some retail therapy and some mindless surfing and time of social media, and then, crash and at night, or maybe have like an hour to yourself if you're lucky, and then do it all over again. And many of us have just accepted that it has to be that way until we're 65 or 70 or even beyond. I feel like it's a heavy price to pay for a bunch of possessions.
Do you see people who look at you as kind of weird when you talk to them and you tell them about your life?
Yes. It's a lot of confusion. Look, if I get comments sometimes at work, not really. They're like, when are you going to buy a new car? And I say never, because I don't care. I'm not a car guy. That $20,000, $30,000 for the...
He works in the automotive industry.
But ironically, I actually like my job, and I better because I actually made it. That's another story, but I'm not a car guy. It doesn't do anything for me. I want a safe car. I want a reliable car. And our cars look nice, but to be honest with you, if they had dents, personally, I wouldn't care. Like, it just, to me, it doesn't make a difference. It's about functionality and utility. So I don't want to eat that heavy depreciation the first 4 years of a car. It's because it doesn't. If it gave me joy, if it gave me $30,000 worth of joy, I would. But it gives me maybe $4,000 worth of joy. There's too much of a gap in the price, so I'm not going to make that purchase. But I know what that price is I'm willing to pay, because I knew what it took to gain these funds, and it's usually a no-brainer, especially for something that really just tanks very quickly.
Right, and I'll give another example as well. And so engagement rings. So when Mark and I were getting engaged, I told him I did not want an engagement ring. And I genuinely didn't. I mean, he asked me at least 3 times.
I thought it was a trick.
He thought it was a trick of some sort. Like, are you sure? Are you sure? I was like, I really don't want one. I mean, it's a shiny rock. I knew that personally for me, it wouldn't give me any joy. And instead, at the time, at least, travel meant a lot to me. So we went to Europe for a month instead. And we could have had both, but it would have compromised our path to financial freedom. So it just, and then the reactions in terms of, there were some odd looks. It's like, oh, congratulations, you got engaged. Let's see the ring. Well, we decided to go to Europe instead. And, and after that initial, brief surprise, like the little bit of the deer in headlights, like, what's going on here? Look from people. They all were like, wow, that's awesome. That's a great idea. We all many of us get stuck into this trap. Like, maybe we have that feeling inside, like, this might not be something that I really want, but people will think I'm weird or I'm not going to fit in and so on. So they go ahead and make that purchase. And really the key is to be have that fortitude and be true to ourselves and what we feel inside.
That's not easy to do. It's probably the most difficult thing. Out of curiosity, Mark, why do you think people at work want you to buy a new car?
That's a great question, Rocky. First of all, most of the people who say that, and they've stopped saying it because I've been there a little bit and they know who I am. I think it's, I think in their mind they just have this paradigm. It's because mostly at the peer level, the equals to me, or maybe people are just a little bit younger. They got this paradigm of, well, I've got this, so why shouldn't it? Like, you're a good associate. Why don't you have this? It's kind of does not compute in the brain, I think. Like, this is just what you do. Why doesn't Mark do this? And then I literally explain why I don't and all the reasons for it. And there's still I don't think it computes, because they're just so ingrained and a part of the consumer culture. Anything outside that is, unless you've really done some homework or looked around or just did a real good gut check, it doesn't make sense. Now, any of the higher ups, surprisingly, they don't really mention anything. I know some companies, a lot of especially if you got maybe not the best employer, I mean, Mihaela's literally talked to guys who said, I love it when my employees buy new cars. Those are my hardest workers because they've got to make that payment, especially when they buy a really big house. I love that too. I mean, you've told me that.
Small business owners, yeah.
Yeah. So, but I haven't, in my environment, I haven't seen a whole lot of that, but they know better than to pressure me. It's almost the opposite. I kind of look at like, why are you buying a new car? Oh my gosh, you know what you're signing up for? Like, this is literally probably 3 to 4 years of your working life after you paid for your fixed costs. Is that car worth 3 years of your life? Like, I don't know what possession's worth 3 years of my life, to be honest with you, Rocky, other than maybe a house, because I have to have a house or something like that, you know? But anything else, if I could get it for less and still achieve the end and the intention, I will.
Yeah. And another example, of people making comment. So we rented for a long time until we purchased this house. And Mark and I shared a little condo, just nice 2-bedroom place that came with even with a gym and a pool. And it was like $370 per month each for us, including most utilities as well. We thought it was fantastic. But yeah, people would make these comments like, you got to have a place to live. Why not own it? Or when are you going to buy a house? Or the worst one, you're just throwing your money away on rent. When we crunch the numbers, when you look at the property taxes, maintenance, repairs, and all the time and money that goes into a house, we realized that our situation made a lot of sense for us. We had a lot of fun at the condo. We didn't really have much responsibility. We continued to do the things we wanted, have flexibility, sock money away. And then after our baby was born, actually when she was 2 months old, we bought a nice house with cash, and that's when we moved. It was when our life situation and our priorities had changed.
And so you were intentional. And I agree with you. I think people are coming around to that more so, is that a house is not necessarily an asset. Well, it's not an asset because a house costs you money and you're constantly putting money into it. It's not putting money into your pocket. So unless your house is putting money into your pocket, it's not necessarily an asset. And there are ways to house hack, and there's a multitude of ways to do different things to change the equation. But I do agree with you. I know the first house that I owned, I think I owned it for about 7 years. And at the end of 7 years, what it ended up selling for compared to what I bought it for and all the things I put into it, it was probably break even at best. And so even though it appreciated, once you start calculating all the stuff that goes into it, and then all the other things I bought because I had a house, it sets you down that trap. And exactly. It's a shame. Now, we moved, we have a nicer house now. For where we are in life, we should have moved again and doubled the size and all of that. And I said, no. I said, enough's enough. We're stopping here. We're not going to continue playing this game because it, in a sense, the house entraps you.
Yep. Instead of doubling your house, you doubled your freedom.
I doubled my free. Yeah, because I'm debt free. So instead of having another mortgage payment and something to worry about, the house is paid off, and all that money that was going into the mortgage and stuff goes into savings. And so it makes life much easier. It just makes life much, much easier because now we have the freedom to do what we want.
Exactly. And it's not just monetary, it's also time. I mean, it takes time. Things break down, and yes, you could pick up the phone and call someone for every minor repair, but that's a big money pit. And then if you do it yourself, it takes time. And I feel like for some people, they genuinely enjoy that. Like they enjoy upgrading their kitchens or whatever, or working on the yard or the house and so on. But that's not us. It's about knowing yourself. Like we literally, like every hour we have to spend on that is an hour we feel like we'll never get back. It gives us no joy. It's just utilitarian for us.
Mm-hmm.
I think it comes back to knowing yourself, knowing your desires, and then not being afraid to just do it. And who cares what other people think?
I agree. I will fix things around the house, but I get I wish I did get more joy out of it, to be honest with you. And I understand why some people do, but I just don't. I guess I I know what I want to spend my time on. I know what gives me joy, and anything else is kind of taken away from it. It's not like just straight binary, black or white, but it kind of. I want to spend my time doing what I want to do, not other things. And we're fortunate enough to kind of build our situation so that is a choice, as opposed to, we have to do this or I have to do that. And that's what it's about at the end of the day, is having the choice. In a few years, I'll have the choice. I don't have to work. Doesn't mean I'll quit my job, because I actually like what I'm doing right now. But it's about those options, because who knows? A lot can happen in a few years, and within ourselves even, what we want to do and what direction we want to go. But it's about having those options in life to move when that time is right.
Absolutely. So you have a website, Money for Meaning, and I think the tagline is overcome fear, find meaning, build wealth. So what is that all about?
Sure. The fear is the main driver. Whether it's an overt fear or failure or just something that's beneath the surface, that's what kind of keeps us at that status quo. Making that space to overcome the fear and to build wealth and have that flexibility to do those things. It's not necessarily all three of those things have to be done in that order. It's kind of a combination of all those items together that we can live the life that we were meant to live and want to live. I mean, I think there's some people out there that they were a prodigy of violin at age 6, and they're going to do that their whole life, and they love it. And I'm jealous of those people. But I think most of us, we don't know what we want to do, or we find out, but then maybe 5 years and 10 years, that changes. We need to be able to change with it. I think your violin prodigy is your exception, not the norm. So most of us, we're going to do several different things in our life, or maybe we should be doing several different things throughout our life as our interests change and as we grow. We want to make sure that flexibility is there to foster that kind of life, to be the person that we're meant to be when we're meant to be it.
And it comes down to a lot of questioning who we are, what do we truly value, what are our real goals? And I say real goals for a reason. You ask a lot of people, what are your goals? And it's like, well, I'd like to buy a Ferrari in 3 years or something like that. Well, okay, so that's a mass-produced item that somebody else designed, somebody built, and somebody marketed to you. There's no active participation in life for you other than writing a check or swiping your credit card. So really, we truly believe that fulfillment comes from that active participation, from creating something, building something, deeply connecting with other people, sharing of yourself and your ideas, and that's the source of real fulfillment. If we pursue those things, honestly, in our society, in America, I feel like we can't help but put money away and build that financial springboard. So to us, we view that as almost a side effect. Like you will just naturally, without even trying, you're going to build wealth and flexibility just by focusing on who you are and what really gives you meaning and joy.
And I think for most people, that's the hardest part, is figuring out their purpose and what they want. And once you do that, everything else becomes so easy. But you've got to take the time and put the effort in and figure that out for yourself. And it's not something that happens overnight. It takes months, years, and then it changes. You have to constantly be questioning it.
No, definitely.
I know we've covered a lot today. Is there anything else that we should talk about that we haven't gotten to?
There's one story I'd like to share, Rocky. It was kind of the genesis for Money for Meaning, right? The book. One of my friends several years ago called me up, and I was always pretty good with money. He said, his name was Simon. He said, Mark, can you come over to the house? I need your help. Yeah, buddy, what's going on? He goes, I think I'm going to have to declare bankruptcy. I was immediately floored. I had no idea my buddy was in any kind of financial issues or having any financial straits. So I went over there. Long story real short, he had everything laid out, all his inflows, all his outflows, and it wasn't a pretty picture. After about 3 hours, I was negotiating with creditors on his behalf. I gave him all my tips and tricks, everything that I learned. We were able to come up with about $1,200 positive cash flow a month to start paying down his debt so he didn't have to go bankrupt. When I was leaving, Simon was so thankful. He goes, "Mark, thank you so much. I appreciate it." I said, "Hey, just call me if you have any questions. Here's the path. Go for it. You got my number." I left. Felt so good leaving. Like, yes, I helped out a friend. This is awesome. And I checked back with him several weeks later, about a month later, and I said, "So how are things going, man?" And he goes, "Oh, not too bad. I went ahead and declared bankruptcy." And I was like, "What?" I was hitting my head against the wall. Like, how? I gave him all the information. I gave him everything that I knew, all the ins and outs, all the hacks, everything. And he declared bankruptcy. I was kind of stewing on that. And I kind of had an epiphany that it was based on his belief system that all these possessions, his continued pattern of consumption, they were so ingrained, and he thought just through his life that he needed to, this is just what you do. This distraction to the next distraction, and this is how I'll get some semblance of happiness in my life. So that was kind of the epiphany for how Money for Meaning kind of started, and going to that genesis and breaking it down to questioning even our belief level of how we grew up and the influences that we had in our lives with our family, or be it with external and advertising and our peers, how we can really question that and kind of look through in a more of objective lens of like, wow, maybe I need to think and question this core belief of what society has told me my whole life to keep this consuming machine moving. And maybe I need to start looking, what can I do for myself, and kind of change that paradigm around.
And thank you for sharing that. I think that's important for people to realize. It's our behaviors and our mindsets and the lens that we look at life through that make all the difference in the world. The biggest obstacle to our success is us. It's that reflection in the mirror. When you can overcome yourself, everything else falls into place and becomes easier.
It's true. It's not an easy thing. It doesn't happen in one day. It's definitely a process, but one worth taking.
Absolutely. If people want to reach out and connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Sure. Go to our site, moneyformeaning.com. We're actually going to be posting a cheat sheet in there very soon. Actually, by the time this episode airs, it'll be up there, and kind of takes us through the same process that Mihaela and I went through. A lot of questions, and we've got a lot of personal examples in there of as far as our values, and just a litany of things to consider and to kind of reflect on. If we're looking to maybe pivot or change a path or do some deeper looking and try to find what that passion is, this will be a good cheat sheet to kind of help us move in this direction. Because like you said, Rocky, at the end of the day, only the individual can change themselves. And no one on the outside is going to be able to change that person. That person has to want to change, has to look. It's just about giving those tools to help that person make that journey and go down that path of self-discovery.
Absolutely. And I thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing your stories today. Hopefully people can pick up tidbits and start making changes in their life and overcoming themselves and find the path that they truly are meant to be on. Definitely.
I forgot to mention the book Money for Meaning is also for sale on Amazon.com. I'm going to kick myself in the leg if I don't say anything. So, but.
And we'll put a link to that in the show notes as well.
Fantastic.
Thanks. It was great having you here today.
Rocky, thank you so much. It was a great conversation. We really enjoyed it.
Thanks for having us, Rocky.
I encourage you to check out their site, moneyformeaning.com. It's not easy to go against the grain when it comes to societal expectations of how you should spend your money. Other people's goals and desires may not be your goals. This is why you need to be clear. Create the bigger rewards and not worry about what other people think. After all, why impress people you may not even care much about? Today's action step. Where are you spending money and not receiving joy from it? Go back through your purchases over the last 90 days by looking at your credit card or bank statements and ask yourself, was it worth it? Is there someone you know who spends without thinking or to impress other people? One of those people who can't seem to stop? Why not share the episode and help them change the way they live their life? What's preventing you from moving forward, and who are you putting on your team to help build the life you deserve? Taking no action creates a far worse outcome in life than trying something and failing. Can I help you achieve your goals? Just email me, and we can start with a short chat to see if we're a good fit. Thanks for listening. You can contact me at Rocky at Richer Soul. Have an abundant week.